Hello and welcome back to the Dante in a Year podcast. My name is Danny Fitzpatrick. Let's continue with Dante's Paradiso, Canto 6. After Constantine had wheeled the eagle counter to the course of heaven, which it had followed after the ancient one who took Lavinia, 100 years and more, the bird of God held back on the verge of Europe, near the mountains from which it first issued. And below the shadow of the sacred veins, it governed the world from hand to hand, and thus changing, passed on into mine. I was Caesar and am Justinian, who, through the will of that prime love I feel, stripped all excess and emptiness from the laws. And before I had fixed my attention to this labor, I believed there to be but one nature in Christ, no more, and was content with such faith. But the blessed Agapetus, who was the best of shepherds, directed me into sincere faith with his words. I believed him, and then what was in his faith I now see so clearly as you see every contradiction both false and true. As soon as my feet moved with the church, it was pleasing to God by his grace to inspire me for the lofty labor, and I gave myself entirely to it. And I commended my arms to Belisarius, who was so conjoined to the right hand of heaven that it was a sign I ought to set them down. Here now concludes my response to your first question, but its condition constrains me to join it with a second. So you might see with what reason some move counter to the sacrosanct standard, both those who appropriate and those who oppose it. See how much virtue has made it worthy of reverence, and it commenced from the hour that Pallas died to permit its reign. You know that it made its dwelling in Alba for 300 years and more, until in the end, and for it still, the three warred with the three. And you know what it did in the 7 kings, from the evil of the Sabine women to the sorrow of Lucretia, conquering the nearby people all around. You know what it did when borne by the distinguished Romans against Brennus, against Pyrrhus, against the other principates and republics. Thus Torquatus and Quincius, who was named for his neglected cloud of hair, the Decii and the Fabii, all had the fame that I freely keep. It put to earth the great pride of the Arabs, who passed after Hannibal upon the Alpine rocks, O Po, from which you flow. Below it triumphed the young men Scipio and Pompey, and to that hill below which you were born it seemed bitter. Then, near the time when all heaven wished to bring back the world to its own serene mode, Caesar, through the will of Rome, seized it, and that which it did from the Var up to the Rhine, the Isère saw, as did the Loire and the Seine, and every valley whence the Rhone is filled. That which it did then when it issued from Ravenna and leapt the Rubicon was such a flight as neither tongue nor pen could follow. Against Spain the host turned back, then against Durazzo, and struck Pharsalia such that on the warm Nile was felt sorrow. And Tandrus and the Simois, whence it moved, it saw once more, and there where Hector reclines. And after that it struck evil to Ptolemy. Thence it descended dazzling on Juba. Then it turned toward your west, where it heard the Pompeian horn. For that it did with the following ensign: Brutus howls in hell with Cassius, and Modena and Perugia were weeping. Still sad Cleopatra cries for it, she who, fleeing before it, took sudden dark death from the asp. With him it coursed up to the Red Sea shore. With him it set the world in such peace that the temple of Janus was barred. But that which the sign that makes my speech had done before, and then still would do in the mortal realm which it subjects, becomes small and obscure in appearance, if we see it in the hand of the third Caesar, with a clear eye and pure affection. Since the living justice which breathes in me conceded it, in the hand of him I mention, the glory of giving vengeance to his anger. Now wonder here on this I repeat to you. After this it coursed with Titus to take vengeance for the vengeance on the antique sin. And when the Lombard tooth gnawed the holy church, Charlemagne beneath its wings succored her in conquering. Now you may judge of such as these whom I accused above, as well as of their faults, who are the cause of all your evils. The one opposes yellow lilies to the public standard, and the other appropriates it for a party, such that it's hard to see who fails more. May the Ghibellines go thus, applying their art below another standard, for he ever follows that one ill who parts it from justice. And may this new Charles with his Guelphs not batter it, but fear its talons, which have stripped the pelts from loftier lions. Many times have the sons wept for the fault of the father, and may he not believe that God would change his arms for his lilies. This little star is dressed with good spirits, whose actions were ordered to the honor and fame that succeed them. And when these desires swell there, thus drawing them away, then it occurs that the rays of the true love must themselves shine less vividly. But in the proportion of our reward with our merit is part of our elation, since we see them neither less nor more. Thus the living justice so sweetens our affection that we are unable ever to twist to any iniquity. Several voices make sweet notes, so several levels in our life render sweet harmony among the wheels. And within the present pearl looms the light of Romeo, whose good and lovely work was rated ill. But the Provençals who worked against him know no laughter, and so his is an evil path, who makes an evil of the good another does. Raymond Berenger had 4 daughters, and each a queen, and Romeo made it thus, a humble person and a wanderer. And once the sinister words stirred Raymond to demand an account of this just one, who'd assigned him 7 and 5 for 10. Romeo departed there poor and aged, and if the world had known the heart he had, begging his life from crust to crust, as much as it lauds him, it would laud him yet more. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Dante in a Year podcast. See you next time for Dante's Paradiso, Canto 7.